Hi, my name is Marianne Monson, and I'm a writer of historical fiction novels like this one that just came out in February 2020. It's called Her Quiet Revolution, and it's a novel based on the life of Dr. Martha Hughes Cannon. She was a frontier doctor and became the first female state senator. Today I'm going to talk with you a little bit about research methods and how to go about working on a research project such as this one. So research is something that I really enjoy. I know that's very nerdy, but to me it's a lot like a treasure hunt. And it's just a matter of finding those perfect little details that will help bring a scene to life. So I usually start with what is published about a particular topic. In the case of Martha Hughes Cannon, a few years ago when I started working on her life for a previous book called Frontier Grit, there wasn't a whole lot published about her. There was a master's thesis that a student had written, and I tracked down the author of that thesis. So I tracked down, first of all, the thesis itself, which meant I had to go to the library where that thesis was housed. And then I believe I just did a basic web search, and I may have used Facebook to track down the author of that thesis. She was kind enough to agree to an interview, and it was so fun to talk to her because it's like two people nerding out about the same subject, right? We both love Martha Hughes Cannon, and even though it's been more than a decade since she wrote that thesis, she still had a lot of really valuable insights to offer about her. Martha Hughes Cannon is interesting because the primary source material for her, which is of course what I always like to go to as much as possible, it's limited because Martha asked that her journals be burned upon her death. And unfortunately her son complied with that request. So we don't have her personal journals, even though she was a very extensive journalist. The best primary sources that we have for her are a collection of letters. And these are letters that Martha wrote to her husband, sent and received to her husband while she was in exile in Europe with her daughter. And while her husband was basically being prosecuted for their polygamous lifestyle, which the federal government was cracking down on at that time. So we have those letters, and actually several of them have been compiled into a book called Letters from Exile, but many of their letters were not published, and so I had to go to archives to look into her husband's papers, and then I could read some of those. They have been digitized, and that's a really nice thing, is that a lot of historical societies have now digitized their primary source material. It makes research so much easier than it used to be. Although it's still really beneficial to have a large screen so you can blow up those handwritten documents and try and piece together the beautiful loopy handwriting. You better know how to read cursive. So that's a major source for her for material about her life. Also, she wrote letters, not as many to her husband, but she wrote quite a few letters to her mother. She also wrote extensive letters to her best friend, Barbara Ruppelke. Those letters haven't been published, so again, it involves reading that scrolling handwritten pages and magnifying them on my computer screen. And really what I was looking for is to get a sense of her style of phrasing and her personality, and that's what I really wanted to pull out to put into the book. So I would say that there's pros and cons to the fact that there's never been a definitive biography written about Martha at this time. And it's mostly cons, frankly, because what a great definitive biography does is that it involves a trained historian basically gathering all those primary documents and then synthesizing them, analyzing them, contextualizing them. So that's a tremendous amount of work. I will say that the benefit is that I wasn't limited by the analysis and interpretation that a definitive biography can sometimes bring. So a very small upside, but I guess, you know, trying to appreciate what is. So in addition to the work that I did with primary source research, I also tracked down a lot of contemporary articles that were written about Martha while she was alive. Since she was the first female state senator, newspapers as far away as New York City covered her election win. She ran against her husband for the office of state senator. She beat him, and so of course that was big news. The funny thing is the contemporary accounts are unfortunately sometimes filled with errors, so you have to be careful. You have to reconcile them again against primary documents whenever possible. For instance, there was one newspaper that ran a headline about first female state senator when Martha won, and a friend of Martha's sent her a clipping of this paper and said, they announced that you did in fact win, but unless you've acquired a pug nose since I saw you last, I don't think this is really the right photograph. And in fact, this newspaper had run a whole article about Martha and included a picture of someone who was definitely not Martha. So that's kind of funny, and it's just an example of some errors that you'll find in contemporary accounts. Sometimes in the Victorian era especially, they love to sensationalize their magazine articles, so they invented dialogue. They were very free with inventing details as well. So you again have to read those with a grain of salt. The final research that I did with this book, that I try and do for any book that I write, is to go on location as much as possible. I really don't think there's much of a substitute for this. You know, we can look at Google Earth pictures all day long, but it's not the same as like walking the ground, having a sense of the sights and the smells, the sounds that are in a given place. Of course, I was traveling to these places in 2019. That's different than being in there at the end of the 19th century, but as much as possible trying to turn back that clock and peer through the layers of the past. So as part of this project, I was lucky enough to receive a grant from Clatsop Community College, where I teach, a professional development grant that allowed me to travel to Llandudno, Wales, which is in the northern part of Wales, and that's the seaside town where Martha Hughes Cannon was born. She left Wales at a very young age when she immigrated to the United States with her parents around the age of 4. So she was quite young when she left, but she returned there during her exile, and I wanted to retrace her steps. So I went to Llandudno, spent some time there becoming familiar. I reached out to the historical societies and the archives there, and was able to connect with a number of the Welsh historians who have worked on her story and on some of the migratory patterns of people who joined with the Mormons and emigrated Wales at that time. So that was really, again, remarkable to sit down and have tea with some of the Welsh historians who have been working closely with Martha's life and work and trying to bring awareness and recognition to her accomplishments. I also went on location to some of the towns where Martha's ancestors were buried, Llangernu and Llanthogid, and both of those places were essentially places where I could go and write on location. I brought a notebook with me and I was collecting details about the flora and the fauna. There are ancient yew trees that are thousands of years old in Llanthogid, and so I spent some time there writing on location, sitting on those yew trees, and there's a church there that has been there for centuries. It was an ancient Celtic site as well. So although certainly aspects of that area have changed over time. Those trees, the actual trees I touched, have been there since Martha would have traveled to that area. And then, of course, the graves. I knew that she had gone and visited those graves. So spending time in the graveyard and writing on location work there was really valuable and an incredible experience. So I hope some of these details give you ideas for your own research projects. Again, it's just a matter of trying to get a grasp of the information through all sorts of different methods. And I hope that that this video explains in a little bit how exciting research can really be. That it's not a dry, boring thing that you do at a desk, but is actually a really active and exciting investigation that you never know where it's going to take you. So I hope that you may consider checking out Her Quiet Revolution. I'd love to have you as a reader, and you can find my work at www.mariannemonson.com. Happy reading.